Is this good?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen and see if we can make this work. Whoops. I haven't done this in a while, clearly. Okay, there we go. So can everybody see my PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, thank you for inviting me to participate in this conference. I really enjoyed the first day last week and also the previous talk, which this seems like a really good next talk in terms of carrying forward some of the comments from Alan and Shannon. So, okay, this is I was just up in Buffalo, New York, and started touring some of their New York's Main Street programs. This is Hamburg, New York, and with the igloos outside to support outdoor eating in chilly temperatures. So I'll use that as my kind of point of departure of, you know, how are we going to move forward, and thinking about it in terms of multi-abled and multi-generational public space, and figuring out, you know, who can we learn from and for in terms of designing cities, our communities, particularly New Mexico Main Streets, with regard to physical distancing, public uses, and social equity. So what I'll be talking about today is I'm gonna briefly touch on, you know, some of the lessons that we learned from universal design. So going beyond universal design, which is one of the trends right now in planning and design, is saying it's not just about designing for other abled bodies, but designing for all abilities. So some of the parallel lessons that we're learning are not only from universal design, but also from sight and hearing impaired communities. And then how do we plan for physical distancing that promotes social interaction in well-traveled public spaces and for community activities, especially as we are going toward the light of having more gatherings, hopefully sometime soon. So this quote from Radical Imagination, I attended a webinar last week, and this really did get me thinking about the conversation that is the theme for this New Mexico Main Street conference. As we navigate the intersection of compounding crises, many of us are asking ourselves, what is required of us in this moment? The answer is radical imagination, a tool, practice, and a way of being that pushes us towards the insights and strategies that remind us that a new world is not only possible, it's happening all around us. Radical imagination means that even when we don't have all the answers, we believe wholeheartedly that the future is extraordinary and we will manifest that irresistible vision. And so I see this as an opportunity that we have to improve our communities for all the various people who are living, working, and playing there.
Hey, Joni, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. I didn't mean to interrupt, but we're seeing your presentation view. I don't know if there's a way for you to change your slides to full screen.
Oh, okay.
It may just be a weird PowerPoint thing. I'm not sure.
Let me try this again. Let's try.
You may need to swap your view.
Yeah, that's what
I think what you did just fixed it.
Oh, it did?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, okay, well, we like that.
Yep.
All right. Well, I want to start with
Not really. We're just seeing what will you miss most post-COVID is what I'm seeing.
That's my slide.
Okay, great. Sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so I want to start this conversation with what will you miss most in a post-COVID world? And does everybody see the link to be able to respond to this?
No.
Okay, yes, I'm
Wanna-
having problems today. Oh, here we go.
There it is.
Yeah,
So we go to the pollev.com, Joni Palmer 511. And
correct.
I will put that in the chat so folks can just link on it or click on it. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this sounds like an odd question, but there's a lot of things that we have learned during these COVID times, and I think that what it is that we have gained, what it is we have learned is going to be very helpful as we move into the future. I'm not seeing any responses yet.
I think you may need to activate it.
Huh.
Because when I go there, I'm seeing, oh, there it is. So folks, if you went and you saw that it wasn't active yet, try to refresh your screen and it.
So okay, here we go. Thank you. This is the first time I'm using it on my own, so thanks for your patience. Okay, let's do a couple, like maybe 30 more seconds. Time, family, flexibility, community. Okay. So, and sweatpants, of course, which I am wearing today. Uh, but you can see I'm dressed nicely from the top. These are some of the things that I think are really important, that we think about what is it that we will miss, but then again, and then how is it that we will carry this forward into the future. And so I'm going to, I hope everybody has finished. I'm going to lock the screen now. And so again, flexibility, time, home, people, that we're working from home, closeness, and surprisingly, these words like wonderful and nature and all of these things that we're learning about the places where we live. Now, the next question then is, this should be activated. What are the first words that come to mind when I say social distancing? Hmm. Okay, I'll wait for a few more responses, but seeing these top words, safety, space, and respect. And I think respect is a really important term for us to be thinking about when we talk about the world that we live in right now, in terms of how different people are navigating space and how comfortable or not comfortable they are being in public spaces in a pandemic world. But it's also primarily about safety. So how do we bring these two into conversation as we think about the future of our Main Street programs? Okay, but there's also the negative side of this, and I'll lock this in just a second so that we can talk a little bit more about this. There's some of the negative aspects of this in terms of fear, in terms of isolation. There's the etiquette of how do we operate in this new world in terms of our ways of communicating and interacting with other people. So I'm going to lock this now. And, you know, one of the things that when we talk about social distancing, I've always thought about this during COVID times, you know, now we're a year into it, is that it's physical distancing. And I prefer that language because social distancing sends the wrong message. And there's a few different studies about this and journal articles that rather than sounding like you have to socially separate, physical distancing, it simplifies the concept with the emphasis on keeping 6 feet away from others, because we still need to be social. And I think this is a really important, I don't think it's just a matter of semantics. I think it's really an attitude about how we will move into the future with physical distancing still in our lives, but that we will return to a social society. So universal design, which is where, you know, we start the conversation about designing for all populations, and I think it's a good place to start as we talk about living in a pandemic world. It's a design process that enables and empowers a diverse population by improving human performance, health and wellness, and social participation. And I think that this very brief definition is a really good way to operationalize how we think about redesigning and replanning our communities, that we're empowering people, we're improving human performance in terms of how people use spaces. We're talking about health and wellness, so public health and also emotional wellness, but also social participation. And how can we do all of these in terms of how we're going to plan and design our main streets into the future? So we've seen a lot of really great advancements in terms of how we create urban spaces, community spaces that will accommodate people with a variety of abilities. And in all of my slides, I'm including links, so I'm happy to share my slideshow if people want to have access to these links. And the different ways that we can ensure that people are safe and at the same time ensure that they are comfortable being in these spaces. So they're safe in terms of if someone has a particular, someone is sight impaired, but it's also the people around them. And then we can think about, you know, the people that when we talk about disabilities from the ADA, one of the main conversations started with people in wheelchairs. And when we think about this today in our public spaces, and that people are fearful of being in public spaces, of being too close to people, we have to think about the people who are using these various equipment. I mean, this goes from in terms of people who are sight impaired to people who are using wheelchairs, is what is the turning radius? How much room do they need in order to safely and comfortably be able to move through public space? I have both the turning radius, but also the reaches of a wheelchair for users, is to also think about how these people aren't just going to move through space, but how they're going to occupy space. And how can we accommodate that in such a way that everybody, that all of our spaces are usable by a wide variety of people. So, you know, early on in the pandemic, there was a really interesting piece in the New York Times, how we use our bodies to navigate a pandemic. And I really appreciated this one particular quote from this article that was in the New York Times Magazine. Spatial awareness, like coordination, isn't a given. watching the choices people make when they move in public, much less in this time of social distancing, can be shocking. From the much bemoaned tourist who comes to a grinding halt in Times Square to a woman with a yoga mat knocking people aside to get her spot on the floor. So, you know, how we are moving in space in relation to one another, we're much more aware of our bodies. We're much more aware of how close someone is to us, particularly in front of us or behind us. But this choreographer also gets us thinking about that whole 360-degree aspect of the way that we're out there in the world. So who's beside you? And how close are they? How are they moving through space? We're used to now a lot more space around us, and also a lot more visual distance of being able to see what is ahead of us. We've started to make these accommodations. And so when we think about what is going to happen come summer, if you listen to Joe Biden last night talking about July 4th as being an opportunity for us to have these gatherings safely because we are ramping up our vaccinations. I want you all to think about what will be your top concern or your first concern about being in a crowded public space come summer. Are people able to, I think I have it activated.
It is, but are there answers associated with the A, B, C, or D? Because
That's strange.
Didn't have the opportunity to actually type in a response.
Okay, well.
Maybe folks just want to write their answer in the chat.
That's a great idea. Again, yeah, let's just do that, and we can see what files through. So just type your responses to this question into the chat. Respect, personal space, fears of some kind of accident occurring, unvaccinated people, accessibility, those not respecting personal boundaries. And that personal space really is an important part of this new world that we're living in. Is again, we have become more aware of the varieties of ways that people guard their personal space, and how it is that they're responding to how other people are guarding their personal space. I flew back to Albuquerque yesterday, and it was very interesting to be in an airport in Chicago that was very, very crowded, and and just seeing the looks on people of when someone got too close, and concerns about being respectful, but not really knowing how to express that. It's not something that we are accustomed to, and so we're in this changing world. Okay. When can we relax? Who am I surrounded by? And so we look at people differently today. And we've been doing this throughout COVID, but now with vaccinations, who has a vaccination and who doesn't? How is someone navigating space, and are they having difficulty? Are we going to help them when we have become so afraid of getting too close to people? I think we're going to have to open ourselves up, our hearts and our minds to interacting with each other come summer in ways that are respectful, but also that are humane and decent and kind. A recent article in the Atlantic once a symbol of prestige, queues such as the one at Harper's have become a symptom of the pandemic. Hour-long lines wrapping around supermarkets, students gearing up for remote learning, waiting in line to pick up equipment, all of these kinds of things that we have revisioned what it means to get online. And so we can see this image of a very typical queuing up, where people are standing in circles, 6 feet distant. But there's a lot of really interesting literature out there of being able to tap into this shifting social circumstance such that waiting in line does not have to be the way that we quote unquote waste our time. And there's a lot of different technologies that might enable us to not have this queuing up. And so, for example, if you have flown into Berlin, and you see how they have for years accommodated people so that they don't queue up in long lines wrapping around in interior spaces, that they have the technologies that people line up when they need to, and then proceed through a series of gates to get to boarding areas. So we have a lot of examples that have been in effect for a while that we can start to enact in our public spaces. So that's another thing. And again, I can share these links because I'm going through this rather quickly, just to give you a sense of some of the changes and some of the new thinking, the research that is happening out there to help us not only imagine this new way of planning and designing our communities, but implementing it, actually doing it. Another piece from the New York Times, how architecture could help us adapt to the pandemic. And this was a really interesting piece because, thinking about how we're going to create new spaces for people, that it's not just about how we move in space, it's also about airflow, right? And people are very aware now of HVAC systems, which might not have been something that people thought about before. One of the things that's really interesting in terms of flying today is it's safer to be in the air, in the airplane, than it is to be in the airport, because you have the circulation system in the airplanes is a lot better than that in the airport. So people are aware of not only how they're moving in space, but they're aware of how that space is being, the cleanliness of that space, the airflow of that space. There's expectations then that we are going to have in terms of public hygiene, that people are going to have this expectation for cleaner public spaces, or at least for spaces that can be cleaned easily. And that's not just surfaces that we're going to touch in terms of hands, but in terms of how our bodies are touching spaces. If you haven't noticed yet, well, when I was home in my hometown outside of Buffalo, the grocery store that is the main grocery store for the area, they have already transformed the aisles of the grocery store. And so they have doubled the width of the grocery store aisles. There's been quite a few complaints about that because they've had to reduce the number of products. And so people do not have the product variety, but they do have wider aisles. And so you can actually move down. It is wide enough for 4 carts across in the grocery aisles, which is a big transformation that people are going to have to get used to. And that's something that in this article by an architect from a firm that has been looking at this kind of work in terms of people with multiple types of abilities. So flexibility and agility of space, but also compartmentalization of space. Her designs include breakout pods off high traffic areas that can serve as an escape for those who feel overstimulated. But she noted they also happen to create spaces with different air circulation occupied by fewer people. So we can see that this flexibility and I really appreciate this term agility of space is how we're going to use spaces differently, but also provide for these spaces for people who are uncomfortable in really crowded areas, and acknowledging that and allowing for people to use spaces in a variety of ways and with a variety of comfort levels. So, and this is from the last talk, something Alan and Shannon brought up about the quick fix design solutions. You know, how are we going to, now that we have learned a lot of lessons during COVID, how are we going to take those lessons and turn them into longer term and even flexible, not just reactive solutions? So again, you know, this is an image from a grocery store early on in COVID. And, you know, lots of signs, lots of people not sure how they're going to stay far enough distance from people in front of them or behind them. So instead of it just being putting up a lot of signs and circles on the ground, how can we redesign spaces so that there is that agility for people to be able to move readily in the ways that they need to? But they're also, this group is also saying we need to take into account the needs of marginalized and vulnerable populations. And one of the reasons I titled my talk, you know, about multi-generation, not just multi-abled, because we are, our society is growing older. And we can look to, and what's very interesting is Japan is one of those places in the world that they are growing older. They have a growing elderly population much faster, much larger than the rest of the world. A lot of really interesting planning and design work is being done there to bring all of this together, multi-generational, multi-abled, as well as what we're learning from COVID. So MIX design, which is from the New York Times article, here's a few things that they wanted to highlight in terms of how we're going to proceed, how we're going to move forward in terms of a pandemic world design. You know, it says here, a lot of inclusive design projects come up short, short-term solutions that meet the needs of mainstream at the expense of marginalized population, including people of color, the elderly, women, trans people, in terms of religion and a variety of other, our diversity of the people who live in our communities. Discrimination is really thinking about the oppression and the spatial segregation of non-compliant bodies, which I think in many situations, and I've seen this as I was walking around the grocery store in my hometown, is, you know, those non-compliant bodies were able to move so much more easily in this redesigned grocery store, that you could get out of the way of someone if you did not want to be too close to them, and you had that space so it didn't look really awkward. And then the last is in terms of social equity. Public health and social equity are intimately related. And I think we can think of this in terms of our New Mexico Main Street communities, in terms of the variety of people who are living there, and that we need to be planning and designing for all of them. So they give some tips in terms of planning for social distance and touch, thinking about bodies in motion, but also the kind of dynamic interactions that happen in public spaces. So one of the first things they ask you to think about is human density, the number of occupants per area. And so as we're thinking about reinvigorating public events, how many people are we going to be expecting in this new era to be occupying these spaces? What is the volume of that space, whether that's interior or exterior? And so we're also thinking about airflow and sight lines. Can people see far enough into the distance that they can move out of someone's way if they feel like that person is getting too close? Is thinking about the viral exposure time. Is there the ability for someone to move in and out of these spaces from interior to exterior so that they do not have that viral exposure that they might be fearful of? Again, the airflow. And then here in New Mexico, one of our wonderful cultural assets is the climate here, and thinking about time of day and season. We're really lucky here in terms of the ability to be outside for so much of the year. Environmental stressors are another concern they ask us to think about. For people to feel safe but connected. And so these public spaces need to be designed to minimize environmental stressors. Disorientation. This is something, again, at the very beginning of COVID, and I would say people are finally becoming familiar and comfortable with it, is how you move through a grocery store. Confusing spaces that lead to unintended contacts with people or building surfaces, equipment, or fixtures. I remember first going into a grocery store early on in COVID, and it's a familiar experience going grocery shopping, but it was very unfamiliar when you were so worried about coming in contact with anybody. And so people were jockeying in the grocery aisles, fearful of getting too close. And then overstimulation. And this is an important point when we talk about various able bodies. We're also talking about people on the autism spectrum. And so thinking about the different sensory cues that make people aware of the presence and the activities of others, especially in unfamiliar places. Again, this can be accomplished in terms of having sight lines, but also being able to hear things, not just see things, smell things, feel things. You can think about that in terms of the temperature of spaces, so that people can get those cues readily and therefore respond in ways that they're comfortable. And then touch. Airport design, a lot of architects are doing some really interesting research right now in terms of redesigning bathrooms in airports to make them a lot easier for people to move in and out of during, in a post-pandemic world. But also having some of these touch-free toilet room fixtures that things are easy to clean and disinfect. And a variety of other things in airports are the place where a lot of design firms are experimenting. I was in the Chicago airport just yesterday, and getting in and out of the bathroom was like going through an obstacle course, because we have made the entry so narrow, and then trying to get into one of the bathroom stalls and then get out and wash your hands when there's 5 or 6 people in a very small space. So rethinking these spaces that will be an enduring aspect of public space into the future, that will be safer and that will be much more comfortable for people. Another place where we can, another group of people that we can learn from is this deaf space concepts. And this is a really interesting arena of research. And you can see in the top right-hand corner, in 2005 is when this project began. And so thinking about sensory reach, it's a various senses, not just the visual, but also what you're able to smell, what you're able to feel, what it is that in terms of allowing yourself to be able to stop, look around, and think about where you're going to go next. And we can think about this in really crowded spaces where it's kind of, there's not enough room to do that. And this goes back to a few slides prior of being able to have some places where you can step aside and escape and make decisions. Space and proximity. You know, in terms of how we're talking to one another with masks on, it's a lot harder to hear one another. And so this is something that is not only that physical presence, but it's also how it is that we're not just moving past one another, but also how we're interacting with one another, and with the ability to maintain that personal space, but still hear each other. This gets into acoustics. Mobility and proximity. It's why I wanted to start with talking about the wheelchairs as just one mode of multi-abled people, is how we move through space. And a lot of our public spaces are not designed for wheelchairs or walkers or people with sight impairments to be able to move freely and also safely, as well as the people around them. Light and color. This is a really important part of these spaces, of being able to have that visual, kind of those sight lines, is thinking about how light is an area so that people can see each other. And what are the different, you know, when we think about the color schemes that will be able to highlight people speaking to one another. And in this instance, they're talking about using sign language, but also facilitating visual wayfinding. And then acoustics. This is a really, this is a very personal thing for me. I wear hearing aids, and as soon as people started wearing masks, I had great difficulty hearing people talking from behind a mask. And it made me very aware of how loud or how softly people speak. And so thinking about what that background noise is. And so, and also people thinking about how loud are you speaking? We've all been in those very crowded pre-pandemic restaurants or bars where it's really hard to hear anybody speak. We're thinking about the acoustical atmosphere of both interior and exterior spaces, such that we are enabling people to hear each other and using that not just to have conversations, but also as a way of navigating in space. So I think I'm at my end of my time. It's 11:05. I have some more resources here that if anybody is interested in, a lot of really interesting research happening. And the image that you see in the background of this slide is from a design studio at Texas A&M, and thinking about designing senior communities in a pandemic world, is how are we going to create communities so that we have multiple generations and people have the space to move no matter what their abilities are, but also to interact and communicate with each other regardless of your ability. If you have any questions, you can email me at the email address on this slide, and I will open it up for questions if I have time for a couple questions. And I see a lot of stuff here in the chat that I wasn't able to multitask and look at, but some really great comments.
Yeah, a lot of great responses to most of the stuff that's sort of recent, is that question about concerns about being in a crowded space. But yeah, we can take just a couple more minutes before we go to break. If folks have questions, please go ahead and write them in the chat, and we can share those. I think thank you so much, Joni. I think this is all so interesting and so important to think about, as you know, and I think coming off of the last presentation in terms of thinking about how, you know, we have sort of done these temporary design and interventions, and we've seen things be successful or not successful. And, you know, now we're sort of in this place where it's like figuring out how to make these things longer term.
Mhm.
And so let's see. Michael has a question about, did you feel safe traveling?
Absolutely not. It was very interesting being in an airport where it was very crowded and I didn't have the sight lines to be able to see where I could go to find a little bit of an escape. It was very difficult. It was also very, very loud, as airports are. And so that was a little bit of overstimulation. I think we'll need to rethink our public spaces, not just in terms of airports and traveling, such that we're taking into account a lot of the things that we've all been feeling over this past year that we may not ever have thought about before. So in terms of I was relieved to get into the airplane, which is very strange. I never really felt that before. As a designer and as a planner, I was thinking about where are those little escape hatches in these public spaces, and in airports, they are almost, you can't find them. They're very difficult to find.
Yeah, that's all just, I was just thinking, Joni, when you were saying that, I choose where I go for my runs now based on how much space like I can see around me, right? So those sight lines are so important in really different ways. And we're talking about like this, it's not like I'm on a crowded trail or anything, but I choose my route based on, I know I'm going to have plenty of room to, cross the street or get around someone if we pass.
Right. And early in COVID, it was called leapfrogging, right? Where you'd see people, jump off the sidewalk and kind of come around people. But there was also something interesting about that as well, as I saw people waving and smiling to one another when they did that, so that it wasn't about, I don't want to be close to you. It's that I'm concerned about safety for both of us. And I think it brought out a lot of human decency in some interesting ways.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. Well, thank you so much, Joni. This was great. We're headed into a break now. We will only take 5 minutes. We'll come back at 11:15. But thanks so much, Joni. Appreciate it. And I'll encourage folks to go ahead and, as Joni said, contact her directly if you have further questions or comments.
Okay, thank you very much.